for those of you who don't know me, my name is Denise Hepner, and I'm Associate Director of Professional Learning with the STF. And thank you, everyone, for coming. This is so amazing. I just wanted to give a quick introduction of Jennifer. We met through a mutual interest in integrating Indigenous pedagogy into our teaching practices, and more specifically, that concept of wayfinding and how this term has been expanded from not just being about how we're finding our way in a physical space, but how we can adopt that spirit of wayfinding or just like finding our way as we navigate cultures that are not our own. Those feelings of discomfort and disorientation that we feel sometimes when we don't know what the heck we're doing. So that often is a lot of different contexts. When we're learning something new, when we're navigating different cultures, there's that feeling of disorientation. So Jennifer is a settler Canadian originally from Ontario. She's now working as an assistant professor at the University of Regina in physical education and outdoor land-based education with a focus on outdoor and land-based practices with commitments to treaty education. And Jennifer and I have been talking about doing a partnership project on wayfinding for quite a while now. So I'm very excited to have her here today and to learn how to apply the principles of wayfinding to our teaching. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Jennifer. I'm really excited that you're here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm just going to share my screen. I still learning how to navigate online learning, even though we've been doing it for like 6 years now. So good afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you, and thank you to Denise for the introduction and for all the back and forth and like bringing this to life. I really have enjoyed working with you to bring today together, and to the STF team, to Jay for registration and helping us with the tech parts. All the behind the scenes work that makes stuff like this happen. And thank you to all of you for coming out to this afternoon. I know that you all have really busy schedules and like it's the end of the day and it's nice out. So you might have other places you'd rather be. So I'm just really grateful that you took the time. My name is Jennifer McDonald, and I'm really thrilled to be here to share about some of my work with wayfinding and relationship renewal. And you might see that other people on the screen also have Jennifer McDonald. It's because I shared my link with them, so there are multiples of us. um, and how I see wayfinding useful for building cross-curricular connections to inform place-based and treaty education and wellness education practices. So as Denise say, I come really humbly, as a non-Indigenous Canadian in this work, and I was telling Denise that I feel a bit nervous to do this, because I wish we could all be in the same place together and, having an experience together, and there's always that perceived, like, disconnect that exists between the university and the field, and I hope that we can share, like, generative in a generative way, in that it can be like a dialogue between us both and that I can learn from you, as well. So my intention through today's session is not to provide you with any sort of wayfinding kit, that you might take away and like start doing tomorrow, but hopefully some ideas that you can puzzle with or that will spark your interest or maybe that will resonate with something that you're already doing, and to share some examples that have worked for me. However, I don't see this as an add-on in anyone's, practice, but rather as a way of just being in the world, with some considerations to weave ideas into what you're already doing. So I'll also offer an invitation later at the end of today's session if you are interested in engaging more deeply into these principles, and taking them up in practice, maybe more and concretely, with what I offer today. So, a bit of a note about who I am before I really get into it. As the session unfolds, you'll see that I have learned from elders and knowledge holders in different places where I've had experiences and where I've lived and worked. And I really try to carry this forward as best as I can. And I also deliberate a lot on my positioning in order to do so. When I was first coming into the work of teaching treaty and teaching Indigenous education, I was always hesitant to do so And at first, I'd always say no. Others, like, interpreting that, like, cultural appropriation just means for me to, like, stay away, and that it might be interpreted that I was speaking on behalf of indigenous peoples or cultures. However, as I kept showing up to things, the elders started to ask me, "What's the point of us teaching you things if you're not going to do anything with it?" And I, like, really, like, took that to heart, and it gave me permission, but also came with a lot of responsibilities to do things with care. So I just want to be clear from the start that it's not my goal to become Indigenous, and I don't have any expertise in Indigenous processes or cultures or lived experiences. I've grown much more comfortable over the years, that there are varieties of roles and responsibilities and contributions when it comes to relational work and to treaty work. And I see my contribution as bringing others who might have grown up like me or who might have like be like navigating this like kind of complex dialogue into the circle. So I'm joining you today from Regina, which is Treaty 4 territory, which are the lands of the Nehiyawak, the Cree, the Anishinaabeg, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Lakota, and Dakota peoples. And it's also the homeland of the Métis and Michif nations. I know that there's others here in the room from different areas, so feel free to share in the chat where you might be coming from today if you feel inclined to do so. I've always been encouraged, in my teachings to make my own connection to land acknowledgments that go beyond just the script. So I hope to that I can just start with a way that a grounding exercise for us all to participate in that acknowledges our whole selves and the various ecological systems that are giving and sustaining life for us today. In my teaching, I do similar exercises as one way to extend land acknowledgements and to support students in recognizing their position within a web of relations, and to also make learning more inclusive of bodies and of spirits. And maybe this exercise today will help you decompress from the day if you need that today. So, I first invite you to take a few deep breaths, and collectively we will inhale slowly and fully and exhale slowly and completely. You can close your eyes if you're comfortable with where you are. Ground your feet to the earth and maybe roll your shoulders back and down and scan your body beginning at your head. Notice if you're holding any tension. Be aware if you're preoccupied by something that happened before you arrived at this session or maybe by something at home. How are you arriving here today? Is there something that you can set aside to be more present? Now, just breathing naturally and normally, focus your attention on what it feels like to breathe. As you inhale, notice where the breath feels most alive. The oxygen being absorbed into your lungs came from the trees, the grasses, the photoplankton of the oceans, and all of the green plant beings. You thrive on oxygen that was exhaled by countless plants. When you exhale, the carbon dioxide formed inside your body may be inhaled by the same trees and plants. Now notice the weight of your body pressing into the chair and the ground through your feet. Well over half your body weight comes from the water in your body. Imagine where that water came from, how the water gathered in the clouds, fell from the sky as rain or snow, flowed across the earth into a stream or lake or river. Remember what it feels like to be thirsty and to drink a glass of cool water. This is the same water that has supported life on earth for millions upon millions of years. The food that you eat gives you energy and all the nutrients your body needs to live. What have you had to eat today, and where did that food come from? From the sun, the soil, the water, the air, the fungi, the plants and animals. The energy stored by plants and animals when they were living now lives inside of you. On the next exhale, see if you can feel the warmth of your body in your belly. The heat inside your belly can be traced back through the web of life to the sun. Once again, notice the weight of your body pressing into the chair and the ground through your feet. Feel how your bones and your skeleton allow you to hold yourself upright. Feel how the gravity of the earth pulls you into the chair, pulls you towards the ground. The minerals in your bones come from the very earth that now pulls on you, the very earth that holds you close. And before they were part of the earth, these minerals were born in the stars. Can you feel the clouds and rivers in your veins, the breath of the plants in your lungs, the earth of the sun, of this energy of the sun in your belly, and the minerals of the earth in your bones? Can you feel how your life is connected to all other life on this planet? If it feels good to you, on the next breath, exhale gratitude for the winds and waters, the plants and animals, and the living planets that you're just a small part. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So, as we continue, I'm going to provide some background on how I arrived at the practice of wayfinding through being lost, and share how I understand wayfinding as a process to build or renew relationships, and then provide some principles for practice. There will be some interactive opportunities along the way, so feel free to engage as much as you would like. But to start, I don't want to talk too much about myself. This isn't like the Jen show, this afternoon, but I do want to give some important context, through a bit of background about where these ideas and questions and practices came from. So first, as Denise said in her really kind introduction, I grew up on the northern shores of Lake Ontario, and I've always had a love for water. So now that I live on the prairies, it's a different experience for me that I've had to like still taking time to like build my relationships here. But for years, I was a member of the local rowing team and swam across this bay on the picture of the top picture several times. And I encountered my earliest memories of deeply felt connection and feeling fully alive. I built intimate relationships with this body of water through getting to know its currents, its winds, its clouds, and how they all interacted. When I was moving, in relationship to this water, it was, like, the one time I like, in early years where I remember feeling, like, completely whole. So it was this feeling of connection that always became my gauge for wellness, how well I feel connected. And it led me to pursuing a degree in physical education, um like, more inclined to, like, those, like, ideas of wellness instead of, like, those ideas of, like, being, like, really good at sports. I'm actually, like, a phys ed teacher, but I'm not really good at sports. So that's always, like it's more about, like, this embodiment of, like, wellness and holistic, sensibilities of being in the world. But it was this following this inkling that there was always something deeper going on when I was in movement with a place. So maybe you have your own special place that you're thinking about right now where you've had these moments where you felt, fully alive. So after this degree in physical education, I moved to Aotearoa or New Zealand to pursue an education degree. And here I was really drawn to the subtle ways that school culture placed me into relationship with the oceans, the mountains, and rivers. And each day always began by acknowledging their presence. So my time working with Maori educators and learning about the life way of Horoa or well-being, or in that symbolized by a house in the phys ed curriculum, was formative to the work that I do now. This was also like pre-TRC, like we're talking 20 years ago. So it led me into a journey of understanding my ignorance of Indigenous cultures, histories, knowledges that I've always known as Canada. And I came back and started this like really like deeply personal journey of decolonization, in which I'm still working on. But it's always come with like feelings of like confusion and shame and sadness and embarrassment and all these like complex emotions that I had to learn to navigate. So on the bottom left is class afloat, and I've experienced teaching in K to 12, PE, science, social studies, and inclusive education in traditional settings. But I've also gravitated towards more like experiential learning, such as class afloat, where I taught world history on a tall ship for a year, and we sailed across the Atlantic Ocean 3 times. Here I developed like this passion for experiential and interdisciplinary learning, but it more so helped me to become more comfortable being responsive, like, in the place where we were and what was going on in the moment of learning and journeying alongside students. So, the half of this year, I was, like, pretty seasick, like, I never really fully developed my sea legs, and that caused me to be more vulnerable beside students than I ever, like, would imagine being in the classroom. But then that also, like, opened a lot of questions about the difficulty of balancing authority with, like, having, like, these these, like, really real experiences with students, which all like, has all, like, came into, like, my wayfinding, conceptions. So for the past 20 years, I've also worked in various roles in the field of outdoor education, for being a program director at summer camps like Easter Seals and Kinark, while also being an outdoor consultant with the school board and teaching curriculum-linked outdoor education programs for students, K to 12. Through the seasons, I led students in canoeing, hiking, winter camping, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing, building quinzees, and biking trips. The longest journey that I've been on with students was a 28-day sea kayaking trip for grade 12 students. And through these programs, I started to notice that experiences build deep relationships that even went and that even like made me go beyond the plan that I always took it in with me, like my time control plan. I was always forced to like it never really turned out like I thought it was going to turn out. And I like developed more comfort with that. But it also made me start worrying about, like, a sense of placelessness when we are applying, like, universal modes of learning, such as, like, the experiential learning cycle on a place, that it often the place became standard or, like, a passive backdrop to the learning. So I'm just going to pause and share a bit of a story, that brought me into wayfinding. So several years ago when I was, guiding students on that long sea kayaking trip. It's a course along the shorelines at Anticosti Island where students gets grade 12 credits as well as their sea kayaking instructors. We were confronted by a thick sea fog for several days. We had visibility less than 100 meters for over a week, and this is a month-long journey. So, an inability to grasp where we were or have landmarks for direction was really disconcerting. Or, like, I just didn't really know what to do as the instructor. But we also had that schedule of our program, that prearranged supply drop halfway, reaching an endpoint for a ferry that comes once a week meant that staying stationary was not really an option for us, but to travel anywhere required us to rely on a map and a compass. So we pressed on in the fog with a good opportunity for to practice the technical skill of dead reckoning. So this is a compass and map skill that relies on compass bearings and time to travel to any other location. So you need to have a known location on a map, and then you can figure out the bearings to get there, and then you know like your average speed of travel, so you can meticulously plan out the journey that you're going to take that day. So it is essential to meticulously plan the route out in advance, and once the shoreline is out of sight, stopping to recalibrate, like, can bring caution of currents and winds out sending us out of position without any awareness. So as we set out from camp with our known endpoints, and two students had the compasses like tied on their kayak decks, and they had like a list of times and direction coordinates. I didn't have anything as the instructor, so it, like really like made me, like, really unnerved without any control in the situation. So, of course, there was this worry of being disoriented, of hitting something, of drifting to the wider gulf. However, as we moved along, I also started to notice that I was paying attention, when I wasn't distracted just by following the compass, to other things that were telling me where we were. So the direction of the winds, the feeling of the current, the sounds of the birds on shore, the horn of the ships across the channel. As we paddled along, the fog like would blow out momentarily, and like the truth of the shore would be exposed, and I would feel like, okay, we're gonna be okay. And then it would blow back in, and like I would be back like trying to figure out where we were. But I was really, like, enthralled by this, and I was really mesmerized by how the students were, like, watching the patterns. Like, it really exposed, the dense air exposed the winds and how the winds move, and students reflected on their experiences of the fog later that evening, and everything from, like, trepidation to, like, excitement showed me that, like, when we have such experiences, there can be, like, a spectrum of different interpretations of what was going on. So this experience led me to reflect a lot on being lost, and the process of being lost has intrigued me as pedagogically significant since, like, really early on in my career. Actually, my whole life, I remember, like, getting lost as a kid, like, just so I'd have to find my way back home on my bike. I tell my mom that now, but, um, so during outdoor education experiences, I've always had moments of, like, of how far, like, negotiating how far I should let students get off course before I step in and, like, help them out or, like, tell them to go the other way. In classroom practices, I always wanted to expand comfort zones by including the unknown. And I've noticed that students often prefer just being told what to do and where to go, without any direction or with direction, but they don't want to like have to like think for themselves. But when that direction isn't there, this like idea of like being lost, urges them to pay attention for navigational connections and kind of involves like a deeper sense of struggle. But as an educator, this feeling of being lost also discloses a lot about me. I like that discomfort that comes when I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know the thing, or I don't have the answer to the question, or I don't really know what to say or handle a certain situation is also like really noteworthy to me. I see that, like, the uncertainty and anxious feeling anxiety discloses, like, my training to control and manage situations, like, we're always, like, trained to, like, manage, and now I'm, like, training teachers, like, to manage the classroom, to avoid messy or complicated conversations, to fulfill my position within a hierarchy of credibility, that the teacher should always be the authority and know what's going on, which kinda came from some of my past experiences with students at sea, like I talked about. So I always thought if I could learn to let go of these values and embrace a sense of being lost alongside students, other possibilities to humbly watch, listen, and respond with care might be revealed. So that is sort of how I came to wayfinding. But I want to just pause there and think a little bit about being lost. And I'll just invite Denise to share a link to a Padlet in the chat if you would like to participate. So I just want to pause here and give you an opportunity to reflect on your own experiences of being lost. It doesn't need to be associated uh with the classroom. And you can consider how you felt in that moment. If you felt a sense of panic, excitement, confusion, shame, maybe. But anything that comes up for you, feel free to share as much as or as little as you want. But I see that I'm just gonna keep talking while you're sharing. Um, Maybe I'll pause and just give you a chance to think. Just changing screens. Hmm. And if this is your first time using Padlet, then, you just click the link and then it's this little, plus sign in the bottom corner. So I've always like known, like through studying like being lost, I have come to see that there are numerous ways one can be lost, geographically, emotionally lost, spiritually, morally, strategically. That lostness can be really like an existential experience when like it can really call like what you know into question. Um and I love this book by, Lawrence Gonzalez about, deep survival, and he writes about, like, different situations and companies that have gotten themselves lost, and then ways in which, who has survived and who hasn't and why. Alright, I'm seeing some yay, thanks, Sheena, it's working. Love that. Panic. Thanks. walking home and following a group of older girls and got lost. I remember I was terrified and cried and cried. Yeah, it can be a really terrifying experience. I remember, like, actually being lost with a group of students and, like, I didn't wanna tell them we were lost. Like, I didn't want to create panic, so hunting with dad and him, leaving me in the bush, I felt yeah. And I guess, like, to like, that scared and panic, like, feeling as a 10-year-old, that I've played around with being lost, but I've always, like, sort of known where we were in some sense, but if it could, have, like, a trauma response for people as well. Oh, someone got lost on the east side of Saskatoon when they were 10 and had to find their way back home to the west side. Oh my goodness, that's a long way. This was the '80s. Yeah, no cell phones. Like, cell phones have really changed the game and, like, those, like, map features. Like, I didn't have, like, Google Maps when I grew up. I had to, like, figure it all out before I left. A health journey. Yeah. The only way it was through a journey. Great. Thanks everyone for sharing. Pre-Google Maps days. And now I find, like, with Google Maps, um, people rely so much on the Google Map without, like, now paying attention to where they are. I was recently in the Yukon with a research team, and all my, like, research colleagues, like, they were obsessed with Google Maps, and then I'm like, "Why don't we just, like, look up where we're going before we go, and then we'll have to, like, look for directions along the way." Anyway, I just felt like we missed so much when we're so always just, like, plug in the address and then don't have to really think critically. Alright, I'm going to go back to the presentation. Thanks everyone for sharing. Stop share. Reshare. Denise, you can see the presentation again? Awesome, thanks. So in thinking about ideas of being lost, and that struggle that comes with being lost and that intrinsic learning that can happen, and all the like interdisciplinary like connections that can be made to lostness. I've worked really closely with Papa Chase Cree scholar Dwayne Donald. He's at the University of Alberta. And I have always been drawn to the way that he talks about colonialism as a ongoing process that denies relationships. And he says that relationships are denied on three levels. First, between Indigenous peoples and Canadians. Secondly, between the head and the rest of the body. And between humans and the more than human world. So the rest of ecology. So in thinking about this, I've thought a lot about how school structures work to impose these separations on people and how often so for example, just in my own like brainstorming, like we often follow linear pathways. Like we have to go from one grade to the next and from one unit to the next, and I only have this much time and then I have to move on. Like we're really governed by like outcomes and that we have to fill in all the time with all these outcomes. So we follow linear pathways often without pause to gather bearings or to understand the place in which we're coming from, our identities and the identities of those in the room with us, um, to embrace story or to think about our responsibilities differently. So we learn best indoors, like with the logic of school. Like we learn best indoors, sometimes without windows, but so we're not distracted. And we learn best sitting down. And when the teacher is teaching us their knowledge, and that there's these technical modes of assessment. So maybe you can also like if you have your own thoughts right now of ideas of like how these separations manifest or what they look like in your setting, feel free to share them in the chat as we go along. In my outdoor education practice, even though I'm outside with students, I grew uneasy that experiences never went far enough to really disrupt those wider values of that placed humans over nature. So even like those ideas of like wanting to like do as many climb as many mountains as I can in a week with students, or like that idea of like conquering nature. We need to conquer the elements. Or when I worked with Outward Bound, that like motto of there's more in you than you think. It always places like it on the human being instead of like any sort of relationship between the human and the wider world. And I, of course, there is lots of benefit to having students think that there's more in them that than they think there is in that challenge. But I always want to be in dialogue in more ethical ways across in between borders and boundaries of what we think our knowledge is. So to like as Gregor Kahede, who wrote the book to the Mountain, he encouraged us to learn about life for life's sake, and life not just human life, but for all of ecology. So this realization has really helped me discern that my earlier explorations of being lost were more prompts for careful attention to or like to find the way in a more ethical process to work against relationship denial. So of course, I've learned a lot from other wayfinders. Rebecca Solnit, who has the great book, A Field Guide to Getting Lost. It's my favorite book. If you saw my copy, it's all like falling apart. Um, she writes out losing things is about the familiar falling away, and getting lost is about the unfamiliar appearing. So I have learned a lot through engaging with her work, but other navigating the fog and my own experiences and learning through my own experiences also revealed that pre often how our predetermined plans or like the trust that we put into technologies. So in that instance, like maps, our watch, bearings, in other school contexts, like outcomes, our like technology, our plans for the day, um, and how the life and the place often fall to the background of these experiences. While bearings allow for group safety and well-being, which as the teacher, like I need to make sure students are safe. And I have expectations from like principals and parents that that I have a duty of care. But places then becomes really standardized. So this metaphor works also for curriculum in that like planned versus experienced and how we can like weave both together. So the more I studied, I find there's guidance for wayfinding all around us. In scholarship, like Tim Ingold writes about wayfinding and this like idea of knowing as you go, and distinguishes the process differently from the precise science of navigation. In curriculum, Cynthia Chambers writes about the offers a curriculum of place as a sense of wayfinding. She writes that by attuning to the land becomes literate, and the literacies are learned, practiced, and generated as part of the journey. Literacy is about learning to live geography and about reconstituting the interrelatedness of the places traveled so that we can trace like our wayfinding like through the paths of our life. And in practice, another book, Wade Davis's The Wayfinders, which was a Massey lecture, if you want to listen to it, I think in from 2006, or 2009 maybe, I can't quite remember, but it's CBC Massey Lectures. He shares the narrative of, being aboard the Hukola, a vessel that's replicated for ancestral routing in the Southern Pacific, and he details accounts of Polynesian seafarers traveling thousands of kilometers on open sea without modern navigation equipment, so it is, like, quite something to read about. And I have found similar accounts from extreme Arctic environments of how locals find their way across vast landscapes of ice and snow, and stories from Indigenous peoples of Australia who follow song lines and dream tracks to navigate ancestral routes. So it's always really interesting to me how these navigational practices parallel specific ecological knowledges within that locality. So I'm looking more, like, at more than human relatives examples for how different beings find their way are everywhere and all around us. Mostly, it's always against incredible challenge and typically to benefit the continuation of life. So, to navigate for survival or to fulfill a particular purpose within a complex ecology. So, for example, um, monarch butterflies go from my garden in the summer to the warmer temperatures in Mexico for the winter. Zebras and wildebeests follow the rain across the Serengeti. Leatherback turtles trail jellyfish habitats. And more locally, I can observe ants following scent lines and bees who beeline it back to their caves, to their hives. They're in grasses, plants, and trees that grow towards the sun, rivers that flow in a certain direction, rain and snow that fall to the earth and then cycle back to the sky. So there is like evidence of like wayfinding all around us if we are attuned to it. So this practice of wayfinding that I advocate for is not a practice. It's not about learning to be a Polynesian seafarer or to follow dream lines and dream tracks in the ways that indigenous cultures of Australia might. But it's about distinguishing a learning process of noticing and paying attention, as well as recognizing and facing complexities such that discomforts may open capacities for uncertainty and mystery. So, and for deeper like care and hope to emerge. So I guess I just wanted to have another break now. And I'm interested, Denise, if you'll share the next Padlet link. I'm interested in what your current experiences and practices of wayfinding are. Perhaps you don't even realize that you're wayfinding. And I'm just interested in brainstorming some ways in which this is already living. For example, perhaps you're guided by a framework, curriculum maps. Maybe you draw on specific examples or reflection practices, or respond like real time in different situations. Have collaborative orientations in your schools, or have useful metaphors that help you navigate uncertainty or complexity in your practice. So I'll just give a minute for that. I'll stop the share again.
Did we respond in that same,
I think that
way?
Denise just shared the second one.
Okay.
Thank you. Feel free to, like, you just respond in the chat box too if it's easier. The chat box? Do you hook up the chat box or the chat room? My Zoom terminology is a little poor. Um, okay, let's see here. How are you already practicing? How do you already practice wayfinding? Curriculum guides, educational frameworks. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mapping out learning experiences and skills to work towards our vision of a well rounded learner through scaffolding. Scaffolding is key. And that's like, can also like, we can, it can become like a wayfinding principle too. When we're breaking down a task such that like it becomes iterative. Go forth and be awkward. Thanks, Sheena. Learning from disengaged students, what the terrain of the classroom and the school are like for them from their point of view. I love that, Sherry. Thank you. Listening to others' journey and story to understand their background. Indigenous friendly images, flags, actions. Stumbling forward towards new experiences. All right. Feel free to keep sharing. I'm just going to go back to the other screen. Collaborating with teachers, I see. Thanks, everyone. So it looks like, sounds like, reads like, people are already wayfinding in their own way. So I hope what I offer can complement that. And I'm also, like, I love that, like, looking for landmarks that are like doesn't like that show, um maybe like a safe port or like that connect people. So looking for landmarks of connection, like being yourself, knowing yourself, and like really embracing that style. Um, it's really wonderful to see some of the ways in which you were already doing this. So, as I said at the beginning, my key aim for today's session was to offer some principles to support your journey of wayfinding. Whatever. Sorry, I just have like three boxes open. Okay. Um, was offer some principles for wayfinding, and as I mentioned, these are not like nicely packaged for you to pick up, and they require some work to nurture and take up in your context. um Lots of them are already ways in which you were already practicing this from what I can see, but just to share a little bit of where they come from, after all that exploring of like being lost and all the questions that emerged from that, in my doctoral project, I had two threads. I was on a personal journey learning from Elder Bob Cardinal of Enoch Nation. Uh, Working, to understand and enact wisdom insights of holism, and Wakodawan in my own way. And specifically, I wanted to, like, humbly, live these out alongside students, as I inquired how they experience ecology, like, ecological connections, like, those moments of, like, feeling fully alive on curriculum-linked outdoor education programs. Because I felt like there were, like, these moments where we have really deep connection, but often, like, we overlook them, without, like, even with, like, it's always just in the busyness of something. "Oh, I had this really cool experience." I'm like, "Okay, great, but we gotta go." So I wanted to, like, understand, like, what was actually happening in ways that I can better attune to the students' experiences. So I offer these principles to educators who want to learn and to engage, renew, and enhance their relationships. But it comes with like an understanding of a worldview that the relationships are already there, so they don't need to be like created. They just that we need to like intentionally renew them or engage them or look at them differently. So as we go along, there's seven of them, and just depending on how time goes, I will do as many as I can, but I have, like, a few highlighted that I want to get through. And I will just share what the principle is, how I have experienced it, and some possible, wider application that you might take up. But please feel free as we go along um, to share in the chat as we move along if anything's resonating with you, if you are, doing this in your own way, to share with others. So the first one is, whoops, there's the wayfinding principles that I'm talking about. There's seven of them. The first one is to acknowledge different beginning places. So it is impossible to pinpoint exactly where wayfinding begins. While learning like often starts in the same physical place, educators and learners all come storied with different histories, expectations, and relationships. So none of us ever arrive in the same way. So as we arrive as story beings, it means that we will come into relationship differently, and relationships will be revealed differently, in a variety of ways and forms to people. So coming to know the stories of who we are can help create the context and conditions for different stories to come together, and deeper relationships to be possible. So as an example of how I have experienced this, at the beginning of any trip or any class, I guess I will be specific around at the beginning of like a kayaking trip, for example. Student A has been kayaked before, is roaring to go, is feeling a little bit impatient. Where student B is nervous. They're nervous of like rolling the kayak and getting stuck underwater. They have way too much stuff that doesn't fit in the kayak. So we're already like in a different place of relationship between like these two students, and how like I can negotiate student A like to work with student B, but then also like how we're going to be attuned to other life forms. Student A is really nervous in her or B, the nervous student is really nervous and like isn't like really like putting um any power into her stroke, so she's falling behind. Student B is like way out ahead. So like this having to like navigate different speeds, but then also student B is so nervous that she can't like attend to any of the like what's going on around her. Um so we have to like have different access points for multiple ways of engaging with our material. In the example I just gave, it's in outdoor education context, but I'm sure that you can see that in your own subject area, that multiple simple access points to bring different people into the same content. In the photo is the beginning class of my outdoor education class that I do at the University of Regina. And I have different activities in each of the four directions as a different way in which outdoor education can be interpreted. And that is to help students see themselves in it like in some way. And then we start a conversation about which direction they were most connected to, and what they learned from that connection about themselves, and which direction that they were least connected to, and why that might be. Like always asking those why questions. So some applications are to look for those simple access points, and to invite students to share what they already know, or they wonder, um, and to uncover who they are. In my treaty ed class that I'm teaching right now, with pre-service teachers, this first week, we had our first class last week, but tomorrow we will be doing, like understanding their own treaty story. So we can't understand our relationships under other people until we understand like where we come from and our own heritage. So I call this like call granny or call auntie or uncle or mom or a family member to understand what your own story is and where you come from. And then also thirdly, to resist the expectation that there's only ever one correct way to learn or experience. So in my example of the kayak trip, both students were on the kayak trip and both students were learning to kayak. But there was not just like one correct way of being in that moment. Um, that I had to like negotiate that way of like correctness, and that like kind of humble that one student while bringing that other student up in the same moment. Forgive me, I've lost all of you. I can't find like my like any pictures of you. I'm just talking to my computer. um so
We're
I don't
still
know what
here.
happened. You're still here. Okay. So, the second principle is to commit to trust and move into the unknown. And this involves um, like a commitment, like knowing as you go, like you're not gonna know in where you go. Like it can't be like planned out in advance completely. By this I mean you have to overcome like a singular truth narrative in a sense, because it likely you might have a picture in your head of what it's going to be, but it's rarely like what that picture is. So being open to other interpretations. Overcoming the singular truth narrative helps us recognize the vastness and strangeness of the world so that it can call on the limits of our knowing. So it can like help us question our own place in the world. So this involves letting go of control and learning an openness to environmental conditions, an openness to events, being open to yourself and know that you're also in relationship to like your own thoughts and your own ideas and your own expectations. Um, an openness to other humans and what they might bring to the experience, and also an openness to what's more than humans are communicating to us, such that like we can't work this all out in advance. We have to be able to navigate it while we're going. So this is difficult because it really disrupts the tendency in teaching and learning to just want to jump in and solve every situation or all the problems students have. Wayfinding has really shifted my focus from like the what to the how, and goes beyond acquiring information as like embracing the unknown. Requires us to act with humility that we might not know, and that sometimes we have to just say that we don't know. So an example for me on kayak trips are outdoor education scenarios is time controlled plans that students do. So on in um outdoor education, one like mode of assessment is that they have to create a time control plan of like what time we're gonna wake up in the morning, how long things are going to take, when we're gonna leave camp, and then they have to lead the whole group according to their time control plan. So it's always really interesting to me that they become trained then in like efficiency and like kind of like bossing each other around. Um, and I have really tried to disrupt this in, like, some of the programs that I work in, and, like, why do we like, of course, it's, like, good to have students thinking about efficiency, but, like, there's a lot of hidden messages there that that they totally then stop caring about everything that's around them. So the more that students and I slow down and just be in where we are, is the more ways that the natural processes work on us, and the more that, like, it becomes evident how, what we're experiencing is in connection to where we are. So, some application of this is moving beyond quantifying experiences such that the most important piece is always about measurement. So, in my outdoor ed example, how far we've traveled, how accurate students were at reading the weather, how well students developed time control plans, but instead center stories of meaning making students are having in these experiences in sensations. So, of different times of the experience. Another way in which I have applied this in like more of a classroom context is inquiry-based learning projects where I don't have all the answers in advance and the students have the answers or have the questions, and we're like following the students' lead, investigating questions together. So even having like a Google or like some sort of engine opened up. So like you're actively like looking for things together. When questions come up. And then students are also learning about good research-based tools in which they can navigate instead of just chat GPTing things and like writing that answer down. Third, wayfinding engages in dialogue with all relations. I shared this photo of an eagle that I saw a couple of years ago in Algonquin Park in Ontario because I don't see them very often. And when I do, they always stop me in my tracks and, like, take my breath away. Um, so I wanted to bring the eagle into this presentation. So this principle, when making decisions about where to go, a dialogue is inevitable. Humans are not lone travelers who manifest their own survival. But wayfinding is also never a static process that can be self-actualized or accomplished by an individual alone in isolation. It fundamentally depends on seeing ourselves as already part of a web of relationships. So I'm not suggesting that you naively trust that the future will work out without any intervention, but to challenge the conviction that experience, training, policies, and equipment are the only necessities needed. Um, like in outdoor ed or in if only I had like class set of skis, then I'd be able to do this. Well, the equipment is necessary, but we also need to like ask questions and listen and speak truthfully and make mistakes and learn from making mistakes. Has fundamental aspects of this process. So in my work with the students on the kayak trip, like, there was always negotiation of, well, there are always, like, easy access points for negotiation, but that included, like, when to sleep or when to eat or, like, what route we should take on a certain day or when it was safe to move on with the weather and the waves and the tide. While this appeared as a really simple task for us, like, such discussions really pushed us, to listen to each other, but also to listen to, like, our bodies, and what our bodies were telling us, if we were tired, if we were hungry, if we were mad, um, and to, like, to express that to each other and have, like, honest conversations about our needs, but also to read signs that were being presented within our surroundings of like what the clouds were telling us, what the wind is telling us, what the waves were telling us. So, as an application piece, to think about how you might be in dialogue with your local areas. So, this might be identifying local plants and birds, identifying wind direction. Yesterday, in my outdoor ed class, I asked the students, what direction should the wind be coming if we for good weather? And they all said, like, south. And I'm like, south is, like, the worst. Um, if the wind's coming from the west, the weather will always be best. So just, like, pointing out these things to students, and once you point them out, like, it actually, like, starts to help them build a dialogue and understanding. Um so local walks in local areas, constant observation, ongoing observation of on local relationships, but also developing iterative processes that can involve students to build awareness of different relationships. So relationships with themselves or with their families or with their communities or with their friend group. So this could be sharing circles, play studies. I often do sit spots with students where they have to go to the same spot over the whole duration of a course and map what changes and what they see, what they observe, and what they experience in that place. Oral learning logs, where every week, students in my treaty ed class, they have to give an oral 2-minute summary of what they're thinking and what they experienced in class that week. And then at the end of the course, they have to go back and listen to their whole log, um, of the collection of 2-minute logs each week, and then uh, write about what they learned and how they developed throughout the course. So then it just as becomes more than just like a product, but then they are also like engaging in a process and the process becomes really obvious to them. So have students track questions they have, do photo studies, photo story assignments, are ways that I have tried to help students enhance their dialogue. So the next one is about generating knowledge through all four parts of being human. So wayfinding depends on us exercising perception of like awareness and sensitivity in the world, and trust that knowledge is generated through all four directions, and parts of being human. And this encourages us to balance these parts of the experience, to generate the whole. So, generally, as I've already talked about, school systems mostly privilege cognitive intellect. However, remembering that there are other ways to generate knowledge through, like giving space for emotion, giving space for like connection, knowing like we have that something really magical happens when you're moving in a place and like developing kinetic knowledge. Um, that can help form more generative understandings of where we are and where we might go. So, Elder Cardinal, in my work with him, has constantly reminded me that we cannot forget the spirit. He has this metaphor that without the spirit, we become flat tires and cannot move. For in his teachings, as shown on the photo or the image, the spirit's on the bottom in the south. And like the way in which, he has taught me, this comes with, like, teaching so, like, learning to fly, in the summer and, like, that feeling, like, freedom in the summer, in that sense of connection that comes with when the world is most fully alive for, seasonally. So he says, if that's not there, then students can't move anywhere. So this has become a signal to honor the whole experience, the wholeness of our experiences, and they can never be fully known. And that, like, that mystery part becomes the spirit part. That we can never fully experience. So we can never fully experience things in the same way because our connection to it will be different. So I've been taught that, like, the spirit is more like not religious dogma that like might worry people in public schools, but it's about daily practices that honor life and living, and that those practices are individual, and that students need to develop those understandings of those practices by themselves, and it has connections back to what gifts they have. So I have found that these deeper experiences often come up as like conviviality or hope or wonder or love or gratitude or humility, but that they're often easy to overlook in our practice. So those were the things that I was talking about in my outdoor ed experiences when like students would have like these moments of like wonder, but often like I would like pass over them really quickly. But now I'm like more in tune to that and I listen for like wonder and then like I press on it a little bit. So one example of how this has come up through my practice is the sense of like this I was on a hiking trip with a student and he was so mad that we were hiking in the rain and he wasn't gonna go and he was going to stay at camp. And he was so mad at me that I was like making him come like with the group and wouldn't just let him stay at camp by himself all day. Um, but then like halfway up the mountain, it was pouring rain and we were wet, and it was just me and him, and we waited for the rest of the group to catch up to us because we were, like, kinda hustling, and then we were just waiting, and he had, like his, like, whole disposition changed, and he was helping students, like, up, like, tricky spots of the hike, but then he just said to me at one point, "I just feel fully alive," and I've, like, never forgotten that moment, in that his, like, "I just feel fully alive" is the kind of embodied experience that I was always trying to get at in education, but that I could never name. And like he just gave me that like that language of like feeling fully alive. So now with students, when I'm trying to explain or trying to invite them into like to the spirit, I've asked them to think about times when they feel fully alive and what happens to them in those moments. So some application of this is to resist the tendency to constantly over-explain. Like I've really had to I've had to unlearn the pedagogy of over-explaining things. Because I always want students to know like the what and the why and the how, and like so that they can like know what I'm doing and they can see all the nuance. But then like in doing so, like I like take away the experience from them, and I'm falling into that trap that there's one way to experience it. Focus instead on creating conditions for students to be themselves and to find their own unique meaning behind their own unique story. So, uncovering the gifts. You can think about how lessons might incorporate, in any topic, can incorporate the feelings, this feeling, the connections, the processes and language, and also the movement. Um, so I really believe that 4 directions can be found in, like, in any topic, if we're willing to, like, struggle a little bit. Of course, someone will probably wanna challenge me on that, but, um, I'll stand by that for now. Okay. The next one is, that knowing is being guided by the flow of the elements. So knowing as we go calls on us to attend to what is in front of us, and I Eleanor Cardinal really prompted me to focus on simple truths that are offered by the sun, the water, the wind, and the earth. And I was like struggled at first when he'd always say like attend to the truth, the simple truth. And I was like, well, if you're saying the truth, then that means like there's one story or there's like I've already said like to um try to like deconstruct that there's one story. But the more that I thought about that teaching from him, truth, like in this understanding, is not like singular or obsolete, but and it so it doesn't denote sameness, But so for example, like the sun will always rise in the east, but it will fluctuate through the days, the seasons, and the conditions. So depending on the particularities of the time, location, and context, the truth will be experienced differently and communicated through different nuance meanings of where we are. So to be a wayfinder is to be guided by the flow of the elements. We must slow down and pay attention to what is happening where we are. So my example of this is the practice of relational or narrative mapping that I just have some photos of on the screen. In this process, I I was trying to deconstruct or have a different understanding of a colonial grid map. So in my study, I was really concerned that we were like or wayfinding, like my experience of being on the kayak, that idea that when we look at the map and are just focused on the map, that everything else becomes like not important to us. So I started to think like what can maps of wayfinding look like if students are attending to what's around them? And then so I had the prompt was like, what are the moments that you felt fully alive? And on our journey, and like then I've also done this in the classroom, in a treaty ed or in my outdoor ed classes here at the university, where students create maps of their whole journey through the content. So these are just some examples of ones that students did on the kayak trip that was part of my study. And as you can see, like, it, like, blew me away because, like, the one on the very far left has this circle divided into, like, 28 days and, like, her 28 teachings from the trip, which looks totally different from the one in the middle, where this, person like, was creating moments they felt fully alive, where the island that we were kayaking around, like, was their heart, and that the horizon was always on the distance, but that they were still, like, developing, like, this inner compass, where the one on the far right, the student, like, developed this whole metaphor of, like, a raindrop. And the way in which they then presented their maps to me at the end of the trip was, like, one of the most, like, phenomenal, like, forms of assessment I've ever done because we were all on the same trip, but they all had different experiences and they all had different connections, and this process helped them attune to their own connections instead of, like, the ones that I was telling them to. If you wanna read more about this, I just provided the link to an article, on the slide. Oh, actually, probably can't, like, get that off the slide, but I can put it in the chat after, once I see you again. Um
I'll put a link to it in the
Oh,
chat.
thank you. I'll be like, I can't, like, find anything right now. Um, and yeah, so in that article, I talk about the process, and some background, and then I dissect, 5 maps, I think, from students on that trip. So next we have the principle of learning language, and this one has become the most important to me. And never, like when I started this work 10 years ago, did I think that language is going to be such a central part of my work. Um, but I have learned that the world is far more alive than I could ever grasp. In learning languages, it's important for discussing and understanding deep experiences and relationships, to share across and between knowledge systems, to understand what is at stake in our collective problems faced, and to dialogue about possibilities for living differently. Um, so there are a few different layers in which I consider this principle. So first is that place-based relatives, so the trees, the plants, the animals, and so forth, have been prescribed names that label and categorize them into the English language or the Latin language. Um, so coming to learn these names is a good starting point to begin relationships. However, wayfinding involves interpreting different interpreting different languages beyond like linguistic vernacular or like those labels that we've always known things. For example, winds, clouds, trees, seas, rivers, animals, they have their own languages. So learning to attend to like the languages of the currents of the river, like what are these things like communicating in their like states, in their like just state of being. Another layer is that like that I have learned is that it's very challenging. It can be very challenging for students to articulate deeply felt experiences when they are drawn to wonder or beauty or discomfort or uncertainty. In some ways, I really like this. I like that they like don't always have to tell us everything. And in my work with the elder, like he would always say um, or he'd always like not remind me, but I've heard him say before that the mystery needs to remain a mystery. Once you tell somebody about it, it's not a mystery anymore. So part of teaching through mystery and teaching through wayfinding is that we don't need to share everything. However, in my understanding that when we build knowledge or when we build language, we can have deeper experiences because we can learn to understand things and name things. I always try to prompt students. So listen pauses, questions, tones, and lingering moments can signal openings for language, for dialogue to build language together. So then we're building a common language that is specific to our experience. So we always in not I shouldn't say we always, but in my experiences of normative school practices, the verbal exchange is often privilege or written exchange. But I have learned that we can't rely on written or talking to bring moments to life solely on them. Like if I ask students, oh, how was that? Oh, it was cool. Oh, and then I'm like, okay. um and that embodied responses might be revealed by words alone, might not be revealed by words alone, that we have to look for body language and other factors that we might be able to prompt students or help them to go a bit deeper in a different way. A similar concern has surfaced for me when I was doing this study in conversations with Elder Cardinal, because we discussed distinctions in language and how some words in English have no meaning in Nehaolin or Cree, and or worse, that they try to control what might happen in the relationship. So I've learned that there's respectful protocol in some ways, meaning through his ways of communicating and noticing that there's often significance on what is left unsaid. So some application of this part is to engage with texts written by local authors, better indigenous authors of local to your place, to learn the languages of that place, naming emotions and tensions openly, so that you can build language with students. Build vocabulary through storytelling, oral sharing, or reflection exercises, and following the lead of students' questions. So I'm just gonna go into the last one here. I think we still have time, and then we'll just have a few minutes to wrap things up. So the final wayfinding principle is to follow a temporal process that unfolds over time. So by this I mean a common trends like that Gonzalez in that book that I shared earlier points out when people are lost, is that they really turn back to retrace the steps from where they came from. So confusion or anxiety that comes up in practice, often do we sit back and think about the why. So therefore wayfinding involves going in different directions, backwards and forwards, sometimes simultaneously, and never in a very non-linear process. So in this way, uh, the validation of learning is not about the final product or reaching a destination. The task instead is to create room for the personal to be meaningful. So this means observations, encounters, and learning through wayfinding can take time to come into being. Um, that students will arrive in different ways when they are ready, and wayfinding will never finish. So relationships, stories, insights, movements, held within the experience will continue to work on those who wayfind and take on a life of their own. So the example that comes to me really quickly with this principle is that when I was talking to the students for a month after the kayak trip, um, they all took up different teachings or in different, and it was like they took up the experience in different ways. Like one student took up like woodcraft because he wanted that like process of like working with something with his hands. Another student wanted to join um like the ecology club of their school, but then they were really discouraged because it was like kind of like an all absolute, like if they weren't vegan and all these like factors, and they couldn't join the club. So they were really like troubling with that. Um, where another student was like looking at, it was a student who made the raindrop, and she was looking at all the different connections of like her web of life and how they influenced her to get to that moment. So in other ways, like I've seen this work in like non-outdoor ed settings when I have worked with a difficult student or like just a complex student. And then like I thought, oh, they didn't like take away anything. And then I'll see them like 2 years after, and they'll like give me a hug and say that was like the most important experience of my life. Like something like exaggerated like that. But then I'm like, you never really know like what's gonna happen with what you share. So the application of this is that, or possible applications to break down the final product into discrete stages. And I shared that process of oral videos that I do that students can return to and see their own progress. Students also love like those maps. And I took them after because I was doing the research project and scanned them. And then like 6 months later, I sent them to them in the mail with a little letter. And they were like so happy to have their maps back, and that reminded me so much of the different parts of the experience that I forgot. Um, Students ask students to share what they've learned with others outside of the class or outside of the experience, and this can help it take on a life of their own. So oftentimes from parents, I hear, "Oh, this so and so really enjoyed this," or like they were telling me a story about this. I'm like, "Oh, that student like seemed so disengaged when I was sharing that with them or when we were doing that experience," and I was like so impressed that they were having an experience, and I didn't even like realize like the depth of that was going on for them. Um so this one is mostly like I it's complicated to explain that temporal process, but when we look in nature, I just have these two photos of Wascana Lake that is behind me right now, in that there's always like a natural process that's happening, and that two places can look differently at like two different times, but they're still the same place. So with that, we have a little bit of time, and I just want to open up the floor for any discussions or questions or wonderings or any responses to what I shared. I know that I've shared a lot, so I am going to try to find you on my computer. Um, do. Still can't find you. Layout. But I will open the floor if anyone wants to share. Let's open the chat too. And if no one wants to share them, that's or has any questions or wonderings, that's okay too. But just feel free to turn your mic on.
If you stop sharing, you should be able to see everybody.
Oh, I can see everybody. Oh yeah, okay. Stop sharing.
Well, I'll jump in because I was trying to be, give that respectful wait time for other people, but oh my gosh, I took so many notes, and I love that these are principles that you said have always been there, but when we kind of embrace them as in a bit more intentional way, um then okay, talking about those frameworks, right? It's something that we can focus on and be more intentional about it. And so many things stood out to me, but some of the things that were highlights were for me were the learning process of noticing and paying attention, and slow down and just be and experience. I think in our fast-paced world of like, get up and go to school, and then you do this, and you go to sports and you do this, and even the curriculum that is designed that we are to deliver, it's kind of like that cha-cha-cha curriculum. We're going to do, 20 minutes on this, 10 minutes on this, 30 minutes on this, go outside, 10 minutes on this. And it's so fast. And how do we take that time to sink in and notice and be within the things that we're learning and experience it instead of it just being planned. So that was just something that really stood out to me. It's like we're on such a treadmill that we don't experience because we don't stop and notice the things that make the experience so like could be so great. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks, Denise. And I had to, like, stop myself too, like, even yesterday, like, I'm not perfect, like, this is, like, always, like, a work in progress, but, yesterday I had my first, like, winter in the winter season outdoor education class, and, like, we meet 3 hours a week, and, like, yesterday, like, I really wanted to get students, like, fitted for cross country ski, so the next week we can just, like, pick them up and go, and then I was, like, just in this mode of, like, "Okay, no, you, size," and I was just, like, in this mode of, like, getting people, and then I was totally not even listening to what anyone was saying to me, and then but then, there was this moment where the student, like, kinda, "Hey, miss, I never, like I'm so excited, and I never have, like, done this before," and then I was like, "Oh, yeah, like, let's just pause, like, this doesn't all have to be perfect."
Well, and that's the wayfinding of the process,
Yeah.
how it wasn't this get those things on and go. It was, if you're going to do this again, you need to learn how to put them on and size them properly and things like that. So,
Mhm. Yeah, in order, like, to sustain the relationship as
right.
well.
Another thing that really stood out to me was Indigenous pedagogy isn't just a way of doing, but it's a way of being. So all of these things that you talked about today, often we're so like, well, what do we do? How do we do this? What is an activity that we can, it's like a concrete activity that we can do, and it's actually a way of being. And how are we being in this world with each other and in relationship with each other and with the content and with the land and things like that. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that is, like, the difficult thing about some of this work, are people like, "I just want just tell me what to do," and I'm like, "I can't just tell you what to do because you have to, like, figure out what works for you and, like, in your context, and, like, I can give you ideas, but, it has to be, like, your own journey, or it's just gonna not come across as, like, authentic." And that word "authentic" is always, like, intrigued me, like, people like, This would be much more authentic if an Indigenous person was teaching this class." I'm like, "Well, authentic, like, in what way?" Because I'm authentic, like, in just who I am and the struggle that comes from, like, trying to engage in treaty. I'm an authentic, like, treaty person, or I try to be, but I'm never pretending to be something I'm not.
yeah.
Sheena, did
Yeah.
you have your hand up? Or were you
Yeah,
just
sorry, I'm also trying to hold back and let quieter people talk.
Me too, and I didn't do a good job.
No, no, I have to confess in front of all these beautiful people that the last time I saw Jennifer, I stole her gloves and I keep one of them, and then I find the other one, and then I find the other one, and I can't get them both together. So, so they're somewhere up the lane. I'm down the lane right now. So, thank you for this opportunity. And I was wondering if what you were saying right now, Jennifer and Denise, about Indigenous education being authentic, like Dwayne Donald, one of your mentors, Jennifer, talks about it not being infused or incorporated. And I wonder if you could, I think Denise was just saying something about that, but I what because we often like in our goals and stuff, we always say include, infuse, and he talks about that spatialized language as being like, we're just kind of sprinkling it in and that, but it's still colonial soup. So I was wondering if you could maybe say something about just that language.
Mhm.
Um, and how do I guess you just were about being authentic, but
Yeah,
that's
like,
the question.
the authenticity piece, but I also like, um, thinking about it not as an information content piece. When we think about infusing or, like, integrating, it comes, "Oh, this is, like, the content I have to teach," but it's actually, like, it's asking you to, like, step into a process, and that's, like, I can do a PowerPoint of, like, what Indigenous knowledge is theoretically, but I can also invite people to step into a process that's relational and maybe bringing them into a relationship with themselves in a way that is like breaking down those separations. So it always comes back to me about like that relationship denial because for me, it doesn't exclude anybody. People can't say, well, I'm not Indigenous. I can't do this work. I'm like, well, we're all human and we all have a relationship with other life forms. And those are the relationships that we're trying to build. But also that we're all in at least Canada, like living on Indigenous land. So we have a responsibility to figure out who we are in relationship to that.
We do. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna jump in right there because it is almost 5:30, but Jennifer has an exciting, opportunity to share if you are interested in going deeper into this work. So, before people hop off, because I know people are needing to leave, I would just love to hear about your opportunity there.
Sure, thanks for reminding me, Denise. I just want to also let people know that over the winter season here, I'm doing a small research study. And by research study, it's just like I hope for it to be like really professional learning, in professional conversations. Like I said at the beginning, I come like very humbly and like I recognize that I come like kind of philosophically as well. And I want to extend my learning of how this can be useful for K-12 teachers and how these practices might be lived out in different educational contexts. So, if you are interested in learning more about how to engage the wayfinding principles, to share reflections, insights, and experiences, I'm doing a small participatory research process. So, this will involve 3 focus groups and the dates are on the screen there, February 3rd, February 24th, and March 10th, which will be run at the same time frame. And mostly we'll come and we'll have a discussion and talk about some of the challenges and inspirations and hesitancies and limitations of doing this type of work in your context. And also have some collective conversation about like the applicability in the practicality of the wayfinding principles. So I think we already like just got off to a really good start with some of what we were talking about at the end here. So the participants will contribute to these 3 sessions, but if there's one where you're like, oh, I can come to like 2 of them, like if there's like we can be flexible, like if you can't make it to all 3. And then at the end of the focus groups, there'll be an opportunity to dialogue, to have like a debrief conversation with myself and about how wayfinding is speaking to you in your practice. So mostly we'll be dialoguing about teaching and learning in a relational way, the wayfinding approach, possibilities and challenges for such approach. And there'll be like some prompts for you to attend to between sessions, but like pretty low pressure. And I hope that it's really that it's reciprocal and that I not like just extracting from you, but also that we're like give and take from each other. Um, so I hope anyone who's interested will contact me on through the process. Of course, it's been passed through the research board, so your identity will be confidential. Um, but to participate in this, Denise will be sending out an email in the morning, just with some instructions, some more information and and some instructions. But you can also just email me if you're interested, and I can sign you up. And then I'll follow up the consent form and some instructions. But if that doesn't speak to you, there's no pressure. I just wanted to uh, tell you all about it while I have you here. Thank you, Denise.
Awesome. Thank
Thank you very
you.
much, everyone, for all the time and like listening to me. I thought it was just pretty a lot of me talking. So thank you.
But it was great. It was so wonderful to hear, the principles and then some examples of what you've been doing. So thank you so much for coming and sharing this information. I will send out an email after if you are interested. Basically, we're gonna dive a bit more deeply into these and put them into our practice, and then just get together and talk about it. So I'm joining as a participant. I'm excited to Share and be vulnerable. I tell my mess up stories all the time of how I get lost and get it wrong and reorient and keep going. So, thank you again, Jennifer, and thanks everyone for being here. It's been such a great afternoon. So, thanks everyone.